Day 3. The U.S. blockade on Hormuz. President Donald Trump faces mounting bad news as operational failures become undeniable. A second U.S. sanctioned supertanker brazenly breaks Trump's Iran blockade, sailing through restricted waters unchallenged. Iran's oil trade data shocks the U.S. Exports in April already surpassed total 2025 figures despite ongoing warfare. Has Mujtaba ramped up oil shipments aggressively, mocking both war pressures and America's ineffective chokehold strategy? U.S. military insists 0 ships passed their blockade, while independent agencies reveal multiple vessels crossed successfully. Day 3. America's naval blockade on Iran ushered in fresh embarrassment for the U.S. military, as the enforcement operation appeared less airtight than publicly claimed. While the U.S. military projected confidence and control over the Strait of Hormuz, real-time shipping data painted a more complex picture of partial compliance and leaks in the blockade. U.S. Military Central Command stated that 0 ships had successfully broken through the blockade since it went into effect on April 13, emphasizing strict enforcement. Central Command also said that at least 10 ships have been intercepted or redirected since the blockade began on April 13, highlighting the scale of monitoring operations. However, another U.S.-sanctioned supertanker entered the Persian Gulf on April 15, according to Reuters, raising questions about the effectiveness of the blockade. Iran's state-linked Fast News agency reported that an empty Very Large Crude Carrier, or VLCC, had entered the Gulf, underscoring continued tanker movement despite the restrictions. Data from Kpler and LSEG also confirmed that this specific ship, capable of carrying around 2 million barrels of crude, had indeed entered the Persian Gulf waterway. FARS reported that the supertanker had crossed the Strait of Hormuz en route toward the Iranian port of Imam Khomeini, pointing to a direct route into Iran's export infrastructure. Iranian reports did not reveal the name of the vessel or the exact destination beyond the Gulf, according to Reuters, leaving some details opaque. This incident came after the earlier passage of the sanctioned tanker Alicia, which was reportedly heading toward an Iraqi port in a move that already tested the blockade's reach. Satellite imagery and tracking data from tankertrackers.com suggested that several more ships may have evaded the U.S. blockade and navigated the narrow waterway successfully. April 14 data showed that at least 3 ships sailing from Iranian ports had crossed the Strait of Hormuz, adding to evidence of ongoing maritime traffic. Those 3 vessels were part of a larger group of 7 ships that have been recorded crossing the Strait of Hormuz since the U.S. blockade first began. However, some vessels that initially took the Hormuz route later turned back, as reported by the Times of Israel, indicating both caution and tactical maneuvering. Amid the blockade, Iranian oil export data has introduced a new and worrying dimension to the war for the United States, potentially undermining the financial pressure narrative. Iran exported 1.84 million barrels per day in March and 1.71 million barrels per day in April 2026, according to tanker tracking firm Kpler's data. In comparison, Iran had exported an average of roughly 1.68 million barrels per day in 2025, according to Reuters citing Kpler, showing that exports have not collapsed under the blockade. Analysts observed that Iran could sustain its production levels by storing excess oil onshore if export routes are temporarily slowed, giving Tehran more operational flexibility. Iran has issued fresh military threats against the United States as President Trump's naval blockade on Iranian ports entered its 3rd day around the Strait of Hormuz. On April 15th, an advisor to Iran's Supreme Leader Mujtaba Khamenei warned the U.S. against attempts to police the Strait of Hormuz and asserted Tehran's control over the waterway. Former IRGC chief Mohsen Rezai delivered that warning in a televised address, which was reported by the Times of Israel as part of a broader regional update. Mohsen Rezai, a senior military advisor to Supreme Leader Mujtaba Khamenei, is a long-standing figure in Iran's security establishment and speaks with direct access to top leadership. In a provocative remark during the same address, Rezai also invited the prospect of a U.S. ground invasion, suggesting that such a move would ultimately benefit Tehran's strategic position. Mohsen Rezai said, and I quote, "Mr. Trump wants to become the police of the Strait of Hormuz. Is this really your job? Is this the job of a powerful army like the United States? These ships of yours will be sunk by our first missiles and have created a great danger for the U.S. military. They can definitely be exposed to our missiles, and we can destroy them. It would be great if the US launched a ground invasion of Iran, as we would take thousands of hostages, and then for each hostage we would get $1 billion. I am not in favor of extending the ceasefire at all, and this is a personal view." After a series of setbacks on the battlefield, the United States has escalated its economic pressure campaign against Iran, tightening financial and trade restrictions to further squeeze the Iranian economy. On April 15th, the U.S. Treasury Secretary warned countries that continue to buy Iranian oil in the middle of the ongoing Middle East conflict that they now face heightened risks of penalties and sanctions. Scott Bessent announced plans to impose sanctions on nations and institutions that purchase Iranian oil, a move reported by Reuters as part of a broader effort to isolate Tehran financially. That warning came as the U.S. naval blockade on Iranian ports, aimed at cutting off Tehran's main revenue streams, entered its third day in the Strait of Hormuz region. Bessent indicated that the new measures will particularly impact China, which has historically been the largest importer of Iranian crude oil and petroleum products. Before the US to Iran conflict intensified, China accounted for more than 80% of Iran's shipped oil exports, making it the single most important buyer in Tehran's trade network. US officials now expect Beijing to scale back its purchases of Iranian oil under mounting financial and diplomatic pressure linked to the expanded sanctions regime. As part of the crackdown, Bessent has already warned 2 Chinese banks, citing what he described as proof of their involvement in facilitating payments or transactions related to Iranian oil trade. Similar warnings have also been sent to financial institutions in Hong Kong, the United Arab Emirates, and Oman, according to Reuters, signaling a wider area enforcement push.
Are President Trump's threats of a 50% tariff against China still on the table now, or is the letter exchange that we talked about now taking that off of the table?
Well, as you know, the president spoke about the letter with respect to he and the correspondence between he and President Xi. President Xi assured the president that they are not supplying Iran with weapons throughout this conflict, and that assurance was made to the president. It's obviously something the administration keeps close tabs on with respect to tariff. You have any update on that, Mr. Secretary?
I don't have an update on the tariffs, but I do have an update on sanctions. Iran is used to be the largest state sponsor of terrorism. China was purchasing more than 90% of their oil, which is about 8% of China's energy needs. We believe this blockade in the Straits, there will be a pause of Chinese buying, but I will tell you that 2 Chinese banks received letters from the U.S. Treasury. I'm not going to identify the banks, but we told them that if we can prove that there is Iranian money flowing through your accounts, then we are willing to put on secondary sanctions.
And are you,
Nick, go ahead. Thank you, Caroline. Go ahead, Nick.
Just a quick follow-up.
So my question, sure.
Are you considering any more sanctions relief, Mr. Secretary, for countries that are suffering right now in order to get more oil to your allies?
We will not be renewing the general license on Russian oil, and we will not be renewing the general license on Iranian oil. Because again, that was oil that was on the water prior to March 11th.
Right.
So all that has been used.
Mr. Secretary, you were quoted as saying in an interview earlier this week that it was worth a bit of economic pain for international security. Is that this administration's message to American voters with high gas prices that ahead of the midterms this year that it's worth the economic pain?
Well, the message is the short-term volatility for long-term gain.
And Danny, if I could add to that, you know, the president's been very clear, again, as the secretary just said, this is a short-term disruption for the long-term strategic goal of the United States to ensure that the world's leading state sponsor of terror cannot obtain a nuclear weapon. That's a good thing for the American people. That's a good thing for people all over the world. And as the president and his economic and energy team have repeatedly stated, as soon as the operation and now the negotiations with Iran conclude and the Strait is reopened, we do expect gas prices to decrease. And thank goodness we have a president and an administration that believes in American energy dominance in bringing down prices at the pump. Look at how gas prices decreased over the past year since this president was in office. It's a stark contrast to the previous administration and Democrats in this city who believe in hampering our domestic energy industry, who believe in importing our most precious resources, who believe in implementing policies that created the worst inflation crisis in history. So President Trump has built the greatest economy in the world before. He is doing it again. Of course, we have this short-term disruption, but again, it's for the long-term strategic goal of ensuring that these terrorists cannot possess a nuclear bomb. Jennifer.
First, Secretary Bessent,
On the Russian oil, I know the sanctions waivers have expired, but how much money did Russia benefit from that temporary sanctions rules? You initially said about $2 billion. Is that?
It could have been $2 billion. We don't know. But it's. Let's think of a different world where oil spiked to 150, and they would have made a lot more by doing that, by pushing the Russian barrels that were already on the water. They were going to be sold. They were going to China no matter what. We pushed them to our allies. We helped stabilize the oil price, and as you can see, there were doomsday scenarios. Oil's going to 150, it's going to 200, it's going to $250. West Texas crude, for the front month delivery is about $92 or $93 now.